Nowadays, Vancouver's Chinatown has attracted both Vancouverites and tourists. But have you imagined what was the inner life about more than 100 years ago? This video will show how the entanglement of place, race, and class had shaped Vancouver's Chinatown by the turn of the 20th century. Essentially, the racial categorization and territorial confinement blurred the class distinction and formed social solidarity in Vancouver's Chinatown. The formation of Chinatown in the late 19th century was the direct result of anti-Chinese riots. Racism and racial violence forced all Chinese to form a concentrated residence pattern in the vicinity of Pender and Carroll Streets. The formation of Chinatown, however, contributed to the further exclusion of Chinese immigrants. In the late 19th century, the dominant settler society believed to confine the Chinese within one place would protect the integrity of a white Vancouver. Based upon this belief, the three levels of government in Canada introduced various legal restrictions on Chinese employment, business, and property rights. Consequently, the Chinese Vancouverites had no other choice but to bond with Chinatown. By the turn of the 20th century, all Chinese lived in Chinatown, with minor exceptions such as domestic servants. However, since there is a Chinatown, why had there never been an Anglotown in Vancouver? To answer this question, we have to look at the history of racial identity of the Chinese. At that time, the Chinese was considered morally corrupted and biologically inferior. Moreover, they were racially categorized as a homogeneous group, regardless of characteristics, wealth, and occupations. In other words, all Chinese were seen as the same Chinamen, whether they were servants, merchants, laundry workers, or manufacturers. Therefore, it was considered legitimate to exclude and confine this racial group within one place. While anti-Chinese racism was immense, a vibrant and expanding Chinese business class emerged that shaped the class structure in Chinatown at the turn of the 20th century. The side effect of a booming business industry was inevitably enlarged the gap between the wealthy and the poor. The Royal Commission's report on Chinese immigrants in 1902 showed that most Chinese in Chinatown lived in extremely poor conditions, and few of them had family lives because the head tax prevented them from bringing their families. The wealthy Chinese, on the other hand, lived a far more comfortable life. One of them was Yip Sung, an affluent businessman who lived in a six-story building with his four wives in Vancouver's Chinatown. In short, the discrepancy between the rich and the poor within Chinatown was no smaller than in the rest of Vancouver. But how did territorial confinement and racial categorization relate to the socio-economic structure in Chinatown? When wealthy Caucasians found their path to the West End, affluent Chinese like Yip Sung could not escape the confines of Chinatown. The institutionalized territorial confinement equally applied to every Chinese in Chinatown. All of them suffered the same from the underdeveloped sanitation system, overcrowded conditions, and the pollutions. And at the same time, they enjoyed the same leisure in Cantonese opera theaters and clubs. Moreover, the rich Chinese could not shake the racist label of Chinamen. Despite of their incredible fortune, the local authorities and media portrayed these Chinese businessmen as potential criminals whose sources of wealth were suspicious. These accusations were simply based on racial grounds without evidence. While wealthy Caucasian Vancouverites were respected widely and could be elected to hold office, their Chinese counterparts could not even be perceived differently from their impoverished compatriots. Racial categorization and territorial confinement prevented differentiation between the affluent and the impoverished Chinese. This is why they had a strong attachment to the neighborhood and the community. The Chinese elites in Vancouver's Chinatown were renowned for their efforts to improve this neighborhood and help those in need. Around the turn of the 20th century, Chinese business owners founded several benevolent associations. The Yip Sung's family and other Chinese merchants implemented a large sanitary reform at their own response. As all classes shared the same place within this neighborhood, making Chinatown a better place was the will of every Chinese resident. In other words, with territorial confinement of China and racial categorization of the Chinese in place, class boundaries gave place to ethnic unity. This indeed contributed to the survival and flourish of this community. While the dominant society in Vancouver tried to shape this marginalized group, the Chinese community had demonstrated their social solidarity and resilience